Those who know Graydon at all know that he has this pensive part of his character. Waking early, perhaps, he will look out and feel that contemplative side of him. And I'm sure he won't mind being reminded of Hitch in his last days. It is so very difficult for a sick man not to be a scoundrel, said Dr. Johnson. It may be said that illness generally begins at a quality that death completes. All distinctions which set one man apart from another are very little perceived in the gloom of the sick chamber, where it will be vain to expect entertainment from the gay or instruction from the wise, where all human glory is obliterated, the wit is clouded, the reasoner perplexed, and the hero subdued. Now, none of this ever happened to Christopher. The hero was unsubdued. I sat through Everybody Pray for Hitchens Day. Now, that was a real event. It was September the 11th, 2010, and we all had to keep a straight face while everybody prayed for Hitchens for this one day. And we hardly took notice of it. And we looked through some of the postings on a religious website, one of which said, has anyone else noticed that Christopher Hitchens got terminal cancer in that one part of his body that he has used to blaspheme our God? Hellfire awaits him. He's going to die in writhing agony, and then when that happens, then the real fun starts with hellfire for eternity. But this was a discordant voice, and most people were praying with good intentions for the Hitch. And he wrote to some of them and said, what exactly are you praying for? And they answered saying, well, we wouldn't mind you getting better again, but that's a very secondary consideration. What we're most interested in is the destiny of your soul. Now, I was there in Texas on April 22nd to 24th, 2011, when there were the Prayer for Rain days, announced with some pomp by Governor Rick Perry, a genius. It was over the Easter weekend, and it was crucifixion through resurrection. Texans were enjoined to, I do hereby proclaim, said Rick Perry from the State House, that these days would be days of prayer for rain. Now, Hitch and I and Carol and others hypocritically hoped that there might be a drop of rain or two in a week or 10 days from the prayer for rain days, pretending with some sincerity to mind about the suffering of Texans, and there'd been deaths and there were 1 million acres ablaze, but we had our fingers crossed that it wasn't going to rain for a little while. And in fact, it didn't rain for another 6 months. And while it was raining, this was in October 2011, I was with Christopher in that sick room, and there was a knock at the door, which was itself unusual because usually they just stormed in with stethoscopes flying around their necks. And I answered the door, and then came back to his bedside and started talking about something else. And he said, who was that? And I said, there's a goddamn man of God out there. And Christopher said, well, what did you do with him? And I said, I don't know. He's sort of out there cooling his heels. And then I stole a line from one of our favorite lines from the front page, where Walter Matthau says of some contributor who's just brought in a poem about the death of his pet or something. And I said, what shall I do with this man of God, Christopher? Shall I tell him his prayer stinks and kick him down the stairs? And he said, no, let him in. So in he came, the man for God, and I disappeared for a while and came back in 15 minutes, and Christopher was looking stunned. And I said, how'd you get through that? And he said, I just realized that religion is caused by death, that they can't get over that. And that's all it is. It's a rearguard action against death. So then we thought about this obvious fact, and I think any talk of religion becomes frivolous if after 5 or 6 minutes you haven't talked about death, because that's the underpinning. And we quoted Larkin, Larkin's fear of death, Philip Larkin, the poet. This is a fear that no trick avoids. This is a special way of being afraid no trick dispels. Religion, that the great moth-eaten musical brocade created to pretend we never die. Religion used to try, but even that has stopped trying now, except in Texas. And he said the only way to be free of this fear of death, the only way to be free of religion is to be free of death. And I reminded him that one of his heroes, Lenin, tried the more literal approach, which was killing clerics. And in 1922, Lenin killed 9,000 clerics, including 3,500 nuns. And I always used to say that was a bit harsh. Christopher said, well, a bit of tough love is needed every now and then. I mean, it's the only language these people understand. He was, of course, being ironic. But then we went on to wonder that the only way to get rid of death is get rid of religion is to get rid of death, and then you'd have a planet bursting with immortals, what Yeats called the ever-living. And there's something very dreadful about that. Tennyson's poem Tithonus, which goes, the woods decay and fall. The vapors weep their burthen to the ground. Man comes and tills the field and lies beneath, and after many a summer dies the swan. Me only cruel immortality consumes. Immortality is a tragic fate, and the thing to grasp about it is that, about eternity and immortality, is that not only does it never end, but it never begins. Because 2 billion years after the beginning of eternity, the end of eternity is no nearer. And religion will go on because it is simply a failure of courage. Now, what enraged Antonia and Carol and others about that claim by the religious guy that Christopher had seen the light and converted at the very last moment, all based on the fact that Christopher liked a Stevie Winwood song that was called Higher Love, was not only impertinent but grossly insulting, because it's a way of suggesting that his courage failed and that he took the desperate and undignified wager, Pascal's wager, of choosing faith to ensure himself against eternal damnation. But it never did waver. any more than his civility and his wit and his wisdom kept there right till the end. Now, they say of philosophy that it's learning how to die. And Christopher showed me how to do that, and whether I've got the backbone to go through with it when the time comes, whether we all have. Luckily, we don't seem to be there yet. But that is the great test. Now, I promised Graydon a joke.
I thought that was the joke.
That's going to be quite a transition, Mark.
No,
But
it's,
seriously.
it comes in Lawrence Wright's recent book, The Terror Years. It's not relevant to what I've been talking about, but it is. But it is not a bad joke. And he's in Saudi Arabia, where he's doing a long stint teaching English, Lawrence Wright. And he says one night, in complete exhaustion, he says, this is a terrible place, Saudi Arabia, because it's so religious, stultifying. He said, doesn't anyone laugh here? And he says to his interlocutor, do you know any jokes? And the Saudi thinks for a while and says, yeah, I know a joke. And you think it's going to be a complete dud of a joke, like, why did the chicken cross the road? But it was actually a bit better than that. He said, the Saudi is telling this joke, and he says, there's an Egyptian, a Somali, and a Saudi. And they're approached by a pollster who says, I'm going to ask you some questions, and please answer them as honestly as you can. And if you have any questions about my question, just raise your hand. And he says, what's your opinion of eating meat? And all three hands go up. And he says to the Egyptian, yes. And he says, what's meat? He says to the Somali, who's got his hand up, Somali says, what's eating? Then he says to the Saudi, and the Saudi says, what's an opinion? Now, Christopher would have loved that, because the idea of not having an opinion, or not even knowing what an opinion was, is as alien as it could be from Christopher Hitchens. He would have loved that, and he would have loved the fact that Graydon is accepting this prize here tonight. Graydon, who did a very great deal to make those last months bearable for Christopher and for all of us. So let's hear it for Graydon.